Chapter 29. Nathaniel stood alone on the landing, gripping the banister as if he feared to fall. A murmur of voices came from the dining room below. It rose and fell, but he hardly registered it. The panic rushing in his head drowned out all other sounds. The only bad magician is an incompetent one. And what was incompetence? Loss of control. Slowly, steadily, over the last few days, everything had spiraled out of Nathaniel's control. First, Bartimaeus had learned his birth name. He had remedied that all right with the tobacco tin, but the respite had not lasted long. Instead, disaster after disaster had struck in quick succession. Bartimaeus had been captured by the government. Underwood had discovered his activities, and his career had been ruined before it had begun. Now, the demon refused to obey his orders, and Lovelace himself was at the door. And all he could do was stand and watch, helpless to react. He was at the mercy of the events he had set in motion. Helpless. A small noise sliced through his self-pity and jolted him upright. It was the gentle humming made by Mrs. Underwood as she padded along the hall from the kitchen towards the dining room. She was bringing tea. Nathaniel heard the clinking of the china on the tray she carried. A knock upon the door followed, more clinking as she entered, then silence. In that moment, Nathaniel quite forgot his own predicament. Mrs. Underwood was in danger. The enemy was in the house. In a few moments, he would doubtless force or persuade Underwood to open his study for inspection. The amulet would be found, and then, what might Lovelace do to Mr. Underwood or his wife? Bartimaeus had told him to wait upstairs and be ready for the worst, but Nathaniel had had enough of helpless loitering. He was not done yet. The situation was desperate, but he could still act. The magicians were in the dining room. Underwood's study was empty. If he could slip inside and retrieve the amulet, perhaps he could hide it somewhere, whatever Bartimaeus might say. Quietly, quickly, he stole downstairs to the landing below, to the level of his master's study and workrooms. The muffled voices from the ground floor were raised now. He thought he could hear Underwood shouting. Time was short. Nathaniel hastened through the rooms to the door leading to the study stairs. Here he paused. He had not gone that way since he was 6 years old. Distant memories assailed him and made him shiver. But he shrugged them off. He passed onwards, down the steps, and pulled up dead. Underwood's study door stood before him, daubed with its red five-pointed star. Nathaniel groaned aloud. He knew enough now to recognize a fire hex when he saw it. He would be incinerated the moment he touched the door. Without protection, he could not progress, and protection required a circle, a summons, careful preparation, and he had no time for that. He was helpless, useless. He beat his fist against the wall. From far away in the house came a noise that might have been a cry of fear. Nathaniel ran back up the stairs and through to the landing, and as he did so, he heard the dining room door open and footsteps sounding in the hall. They were coming. Then, from below, Mrs. Underwood's voice, anxious and inquiring, spearing Nathaniel with a thrill of pain.
"Is everything all right, Arthur?"
The reply was dull, weary, almost unrecognizable.
"I am just showing Mr. Lovelace something in my study. Thank you. We need nothing."
They were climbing the stairs now. Nathaniel was in an agony of indecision. What should he do? Just as someone turned the corner, he ducked behind the nearest door and closed it almost to. Breathing hard, he pressed his eye against the small crack that gave a view onto the landing. A slow procession passed. Mr. Underwood led the way. His hair and clothes were disordered, his eyes wild, his back bent as if by a great weight. Behind walked Simon Lovelace, eyes hidden behind his glasses, his mouth a thin, grim slit. Behind him came a spider, scuttling in the shadows of the wall. The procession disappeared in the direction of the study. Nathaniel sat back, head spinning, nauseous with guilt and fear. Underwood's face, despite his extreme dislike of his master, to see him in that state rebelled against everything Nathaniel had been taught. Yes, he was weak. Yes, he was petty. Yes, he had treated Nathaniel with consistent disdain. But the man was a minister, one of the 300 in the government, and he had not taken the amulet. Nathaniel had. He bit his lip. Lovelace was a criminal. Who could tell what he might do? Let Underwood take the blame. He deserved it. He had never stuck up for Nathaniel. He had sacked Mrs. Lutyens. Let him suffer too. Why had Nathaniel put the amulet in the study in the first place, if not to protect himself when Lovelace came? He would stay out of the way, like the genie said, get ready to run if necessary. Nathaniel's head sank into his hands. He could not run. He could not hide. That was the advice of a demon, treacherous and sly. Running and hiding were not the actions of an honorable magician. If he let his master face Lovelace alone, how would he live with himself again? When his master suffered, Mrs. Underwood would suffer too, and that would be impossible to bear. No, there was no help for it. Now that the crisis was upon him, Nathaniel found, to his surprise and horror, that he had to act. Regardless of the consequences, he had to intervene. Even to think of doing what he now did made him physically sick. Nevertheless, he managed it, little by little, step by dragging step. Out from behind the door, across the landing, along towards the study stairs. Down the stairs, one at a time. With every step, his common sense screamed at him to turn and flee, but he resisted. To run would be to fail Mrs. Underwood. He would go in there and tell the truth, come what may. The door was open, the fiery hex diffused. Yellow light spilled from inside. His brain seemed to have shut down. He did not fully understand what he was about to do. He pushed at the door and went in, just in time to witness the moment of discovery. Lovelace and Underwood were standing by a wall cupboard with their backs to him. The cupboard doors gaped wide. Even as he watched, Lovelace's head craned forwards eagerly like a hunting cat's, and his hands stretched out and knocked something aside. He gave a cry of triumph. Slowly, he turned and raised his hand before Underwood's corpse-white face. Nathaniel's shoulders slumped. How small it looked, the Amulet of Samarkand. How insignificant it seemed, as it hung from Lovelace's fingers on its slender gold chain. It swung gently, glinting in the study light. Lovelace smiled. Well, well, what have we here? Underwood was shaking his head in confusion and disbelief. In those few seconds, his face had aged.
No,
he whispered.
a trick. You're framing me.
Lovelace wasn't even looking at him. He gazed at his prize. I can't imagine what you thought you could do with this, he said. Summoning Bartimaeus on its own would have been quite enough to wear you out.
I keep saying,
Underwood said weakly,
I don't know anything about this Bartimaeus, and I know nothing about your object, nor how it got there.
Nathaniel heard a new voice speaking. High and shaky. It was his own.
He's telling the truth,
he said.
I took it. The person that you want is me.
The silence that followed this statement lasted almost 5 seconds. Both magicians spun round on the instant, only to stare at him open-mouthed in shock. Mr. Underwood's eyebrows rose high, sank low, then rose again, mirroring his utter bewilderment. Lovelace wore an uncomprehending frown. Nathaniel took the opportunity to walk further into the room.
It was I,
he said, his voice a little firmer now that the deed was done.
He knows nothing about it. You can leave him alone.
Underwood blinked and shook his head. He seemed to doubt the evidence of his senses. Lovelace remained quite still, his hidden eyes fixed on Nathaniel. The Amulet of Samarkand swung gently between his motionless fingers. Nathaniel cleared his throat, which was dry. What would happen now? He dared not guess. He had not thought beyond his confession. Somewhere in the room, his servant lurked, so he was not entirely defenseless. If necessary, he hoped Bartimaeus would come to his aid. His master found his voice at last.
What are you gibbering about, you fool? You can have no idea what we discuss. Leave here at once.
A thought occurred to him.
Wait, how did you get out of the room?
At his side, Lovelace's frown suddenly fractured into a twitching smile. He laughed quietly.
A moment, Arthur. Perhaps you are being too hasty.
For an instant, a fleeting glimpse of Underwood's irascibility returned.
Don't be absurd! This stripling cannot have committed the crime. He would have had to bypass my fire hex for a start, not to mention your own defenses.
And raise a genie of the 14th level, murmured Lovelace. That too.
Exactly. The notion is
Underwood gasped. Sudden understanding dawned in his eyes.
Wait. Perhaps. Can it be possible? Only today, Lovelace, I caught this brat with summoning equipment and Adelbrand's pentacle chalked out in his room. He had sophisticated books, the mouth of Ptolemy, for one. I assumed he had failed, was overambitious. But what if I was wrong?
Simon Lovelace said nothing. He never looked away from Nathaniel.
Just this past hour,
Underwood went on,
I caught him spying on me in my study. He had a scrying glass, something I had never given him. If he is capable of that, who knows what other crimes he might attempt?
Even so, Lovelace said softly, why should he steal from me? Nathaniel could tell from his master's behavior that he had not recognized the amulet for what it was, and realized that this ignorance might yet save him. Would Lovelace believe the same was true of Nathaniel, too? He spoke up quickly, trying to sound as much like a child as possible.
It was just a trick, sir,
he said.
A joke. I wanted to get back at you for hitting me that time. I asked the demon to take something of yours, anything at all. I was going to keep that thing till I was older and, till I could find out what it was and how to use it. I hope it wasn't valuable, sir. I'm very sorry for putting you to any trouble.
He trailed off, excruciatingly aware of how weak his story was. Lovelace just gazed at him. He could make out nothing from the man's expression. But his master, for one, believed him. His full fury was unleashed.
This is the last straw, Mandrake, he cried. I will have you up before the court. Even if you escape prison, you'll be stripped of your apprenticeship and turned out into the street. I will cast you out. All jobs will be closed to you. You will become a pauper among commoners.
Yes, sir. anything if only Lovelace would leave.
I can only apologize, Lovelace.
Underwood drew himself up and puffed out his chest.
We have both been inconvenienced. He has betrayed me, and from you he has stolen a most powerful treasure, this amulet.
He glanced towards a small gold oval dangling from Lovelace's hand, and in that sudden, fatal instant, realized what it was. A short, suppressed intake of breath sounded against his teeth. It was a small noise, but Nathaniel heard it clearly enough. Lovelace didn't move. The color drained from Underwood's cheeks. His eyes darted toward Lovelace's face to see if he had noticed anything. Nathaniel's eyes did likewise. Through the blood pounding in his head, he heard Underwood struggling to continue where he had broken off.
And we shall both see him suitably punished. Yes, we will. He will regret the day when he ever thought to—
The other magician held up his hand. Instantly, Underwood was silent. "Well, John Mandrake," Simon Lovelace said, "I am almost very impressed. Yes, I have been inconvenienced. The last few days have been difficult for me. But see, I have my prize again, and all will now be well. Please do not apologize. To summon a genie such as Bartimaeus at your age is no mean achievement. To control him over several days is even more surprising. You left me frustrated, too, which is a rare event, and Underwood ignorant, which is somewhat less unusual. All very clever. Only at the end have you fallen down. What possessed you to own up to your action? I might have dealt quietly with Underwood and left you alone." His voice was soft and reasonable. Underwood urgently tried to speak, but Lovelace interrupted him. "Quiet, man. I want to hear the boy's reason."
Because it wasn't his fault,
Nathaniel said, stolidly.
He knew nothing. Your quarrel was with me, whether you knew so or not. He should be left out of it. That's why I came down. That's why I came down.
A sense of the utter futility of his actions weighed down upon him. Lovelace chuckled. "Some childish concept of nobility, is it?" he said. "I guessed as much. The honorable course of action. Heroic, but stupid. Where did you get that notion from? Not from Underwood here, I'll bet."
"I robbed you because you wronged me," Nathaniel continued. "I wanted to get my own back. That's all there is to it. Punish me if you want. I don't care."
His attitude of surly resignation concealed a growing hope. Maybe Lovelace did not realize that they knew about the amulet. Maybe he would administer some token punishment and go. Underwood was evidently hoping the same thing. He grasped Lovelace eagerly by the arm.
"As you have seen, Simon, I am entirely innocent in this affair. It was this wicked, scheming boy. You must deal with him as you wish. Whatever sentence fits the crime, you may administer it. I leave it entirely up to you."
Gently, Lovelace disengaged himself. "Thank you, Underwood. I shall administer his punishment shortly."
"Good."
"After disposing of you."
"What?"
For a second, Underwood froze. Then, with a turn of speed unexpected in a man of his age, he ran for the open door. Just as he passed Nathaniel, a gust of wind from nowhere slammed the door tight shut. Underwood rattled the handle and pulled with all his strength, but it remained fast. With a snarl of fear, he spun round. He and Nathaniel stood facing Simon Lovelace across the room. Nathaniel's legs shook. He looked around wildly for Bartimaeus, but the spider was nowhere to be seen. With fastidious care, Lovelace took the Amulet of Samarkand by its chain and hung it round his neck. "I am not stupid, John," he said. "It is possible that you do not know what this object is, but frankly, I cannot take that chance. And, certainly, poor Arthur knows." At this, Underwood stretched out a clawing hand and grasped Nathaniel around the neck. His voice was cracked with panic.
"Yes, but I will say nothing. You can trust me, Lovelace. You may keep the amulet for all eternity, for all I care. But the boy, he's a meddling fool. He must be silenced before he blabs. Kill him now, and the matter will be finished."
His nails dug into Nathaniel's skin. He thrust him forward. Nathaniel cried out in pain. A smirk extended across Lovelace's face. Such loyalty from a master to his apprentice. Very touching. You see, John, Underwood, Underwood and I are giving you a final lesson in the art of being a magician. And perhaps with our help, you will understand your error in owning up to me today. You believe the notion of the honorable magician who takes responsibility for his actions. Mere propaganda. Such a thing does not exist. There is no honor, no nobility, no justice. Every magician acts only for himself, seizing each opportunity he can. When he is weak, he avoids danger, which is why second-raters plod away within the system. Arthur knows all about that, don't you, Underwood? But when he is strong, he strikes. How do you think Rupert Devereux himself came to power? His master killed the previous prime minister in a coup 20 years ago, and he inherited the title. That is the truth of it. That is how things are always done. When I use the amulet next week, I will be following in a grand tradition reaching back to Gladstone. The glasses flashed. A hand was raised, ready to begin a gesture. It may console you to know that, even before you arrived, I was resolved to kill you and everyone in this house. I cannot leave anything to chance. So, your stupidity in coming here has actually changed nothing. An image of Mrs. Underwood downstairs in the kitchen flashed through Nathaniel's mind. Tears flooded his eyes. Please. You are weak, boy, just like your master. Lovelace clapped his hands. The light in the study suddenly darkened. A tremor ran across the floor. Nathaniel sensed something appearing in the far corner of the room, but fear froze him in place. He dared not look to see. At his side, Underwood uttered the words of a defensive charm. A shimmering green net of protective threads rose up to enfold him. Nathaniel was excluded, defenseless.
Master!
At that moment, like a shaft collapsing in a slate mine, a terrible voice echoed through the room. Your wish. Lovelace's voice. Destroy them both, and anything else living in the house. Burn it to the ground with all its contents. Underwood gave a great cry.
Take the boy! Leave me!
He pushed Nathaniel with frantic strength. Nathaniel sprawled forwards, stumbled, and fell. His eyes were blind with tears. He tried to rise, conscious only of his utter helplessness. Close by sounded a splintering noise. He opened his mouth to scream. Then claws descended and seized him round the throat.